Hi, how's everybody doing today? I think I have some good news, a little housekeeping. Lunch has been moved up a little bit after my presentation today. And you will then reconvene after lunch at 1:25. Before they asked me to come up here and talk about this and give that announcement, I don't think anybody realized that I'd be talking about shit and rainwater for most of this presentation. So I hope I don't make this unappealing to you. So my name's Tim Duggan. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner. We have offices based in Kansas City and New Orleans, and I have grown to fall in love with Pittsburgh quite a bit over the last year. We've been spending quite a bit of time in Pittsburgh, and it's really exciting in the work we do. Most of the work we do revolves around the idea of green infrastructure and stormwater infrastructure, but leveraging it through an approach called urban acupuncture, looking at a systematic process where things can be identified in terms of resources and funding mechanisms, and those can be placed with pinpoint precision to create systemic change in our communities around the country. There's over 150 cities in North America right now that are under consent decree and are committed to spending $300 billion over the next 25 years, separating their stormwaters, pipes and wastewater pipes to reduce overflows to our creeks, rivers, and streams. This is a substantial amount of money, and it is in fact one of the biggest infrastructure projects our cities across the country are taking in advantage of right now. But this is also an unfunded mandate to make these things happen. So we have to think creatively with how we make those changes happen, how we incorporate community engagement, how we incorporate community planning, and how we leverage historical siloed departments within city and county departments. So give you a little context to where I'm from. I come from the prairie. I was born and raised in the Midwest in Kansas City. This is our kind of our backdrop of our skyline, and we currently are about 10 years in to an adaptive management plan, green infrastructure consent decree. In fact, Kansas City was the first EPA-approved city in North America to allow the front-loading of green infrastructure, to allow the back-loading and the reduction of proposed tunnels in America, and we've seen great impacts from that time. And so I'll give a little bit of context to some of those projects, lessons learned from those, but mainly focus on what we've been doing here in Pittsburgh over the last 6 to 12 months. So like I just mentioned, Kansas City was the first consent decree to do the adaptive management green infrastructure plan, and what you're looking at is the first rain garden in downtown Kansas City that started this movement. The movement also was intended to reduce its overflow events into the Missouri River and drastically reduce that contamination to make those rivers more fishable and swimmable. One of the first watersheds, and many of the first watersheds in communities around the country, oftentimes are low to moderate income communities. Our first string suburbs are downtown suburbs because they, in fact, have the archaic infrastructure that had it combined. So this is oftentimes deferred infrastructure maintenance, and the answer has historically been just a bigger tunnel. So the community and the city council and the leadership in Kansas City said, let's take a second and pause. We have a watershed, we have a community, but we want to look at it differently. We want to create investment in the public realm. We want to create leveraged investment of regenerative infrastructure, and we want to take this and create road diets. We want to create complete walkable streets that can connect these strategies and nodes, and we want to have them anchored in ponds and parks to create a quality of life throughout the neighborhood. So instead of investing in a pipe that you dig up, bury, and never see again, let's think strategically through urban design and how this money can leverage community transformation. And so first and foremost, we have a series of metrics that we look at that, yes, it needs to technically work, but those balance metrics also have to have an environmental balance to them, a community balance, and an economic development balance. You'll never be able to change the bean counter into a tree hugger without sustainable economics, without showing the value in hugging trees. And so to the Marlboro neighborhood watershed that you just saw, seeing a 58% property value increase is one of those metrics. Seeing health baselines improve because safe and healthy walkable corridors and neighborhoods, people are not afraid to go walking at night. That also ties to a 26% reduction in crime in that zip code. Those are urban design strategies that are directly tied to public infrastructure investment. So that same watershed that was proposed to have a gray tunnel now has a series of 5 miles of boulevards and interconnected bioswales that link public parks, that connect to transit-oriented development, and you now have safe, healthy corridors to promote job creation, economic development, workforce development. And it can be jobs from the PhD to the PhD. You can talk about planting plants, but you can also talk about water quality testing, water monitoring testing. EPA scientists need to be involved in this, as well as the landscaper that's just going to put plugs in the ground. And so that idea was brought to Pittsburgh, shared with Pittsburgh, and a contingency from Pittsburgh just last year. P4, when I was asked to speak last year, came to Kansas City to see what that means. What does it mean to be 8 years ahead of a consent decree and see built things? What does it mean to see some of these neighborhoods starting to thrive again and take ownership in that neighborhood while building wealth, but not building something to displace them? And so we were asked to be a part of a very healthy team and robust team here in Pittsburgh, led by PWSA, Mott McDonald, engineer of record, Arcadis, Christine Mondor with the Evolve, and then we also were asked to look in a deeper dive into a series of your regional parks with the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. And so this diagram that you're looking at is a watershed map of the city, and you'll start to see the 3 priority watersheds that we were asked to look at, and that was Southside Park, 21st Street. That was 4 Mile Run, which really drains right through Shinley Park down to the proposed Almano site, and Washington Boulevard, Negley Run on the other side of the city, which has most notably some significant losses of lives tied to stormwater and flooding. And so these are very serious matters that have to be addressed. It's not just about a basement backup every now and then. So first and foremost, we developed a concept that was to develop a green infrastructure first urban planning process. We didn't want to get into an argument about tunnels versus green. We just wanted to put blinders on, look at an urban design framework in these watersheds that can provide catalytic community development through these strategies and invest in the public realm. Because otherwise, a lot of these planning documents that are emerging from the community would likely sit on the shelf for a long time. What we found and what the engineers found in the city of Pittsburgh is similarly to like an 80-20 rule. 80% of the problems of runoff are actually coming from 20% of the watersheds. And when you distill that down, you can start to prioritize what watersheds you need to focus on and what watersheds have the biggest yield of runoff, and that means the biggest bang for the buck to be affordable. And so we started to also help identify what these ones had, how you could reduce risk, how you could increase opportunity, promote development, and then how all these things could be synergistically tied together through planning and urban design. But it's really about collaboration. It's really about building a team of folks that understand how to collaborate, how to share crayons, but they're ninjas in their own field. They can bring this together and make it happen to first develop a set of guiding principles for this project. And these were shared with everything from the upper leadership in the city all the way down to the communities we worked in. Public realm investments have to be cost effective. Each one of these green infrastructure projects need to have workforce development opportunities. They also would want to redevelop and reestablish the riverfront connections for Pittsburgh with a complete streets and a healthy walkable community approach. All in all, in our time of climate change and regenerative infrastructure, to be more resilient, because we're finding that 50-year storm events are happening every 2 years. We can't treat water and rain like we did for the last 100 years for the next 100. We have to think differently. And so with that, I'm going to give a deeper dive into the 3 pilot projects with a little bit more focus on 4 Mile Run. So our process is, once again, starts with urban design. It doesn't start with the engineering. It starts also with recognizing what the amazing regional parks you have in the city that are highly underutilized in terms of stormwater infrastructure and an ecological footprint that really needs to be restored a bit. But when you look at nodes, corridors, and connectors as a process, you start to get some interesting things. You start to get Schenley Park, a regional park, that's both a connector and a node. Schenley Drive and Forbes Avenue connects to Frick Park. You have Hazelwood Community and a greenway system and an Almano site, the new development, that could look at the paradigm of stormwater differently. And you have a very heavy, dense urban area around Oakland and a job center that connects all of these things together. But we heard very clearly we need to deal with flood control. We need to make these about community amenities, about restoration of the ecology in place, and reinforce community gateways, nodes, and corridors. Well, instead of looking at it as a reactive approach of, hey, this inlet floods, let's put a rain garden right here, we looked at it as a proactive strategy of urban design that can then quantify build-out moving forward. But when you take a step back, this is a diagram of the historic streams in 4 Mile Run that go through Schenley Park. Panther Hollow Lake and Panther Hollow Run right now drain about 80 million gallons annually of fresh water into the lake that overflow into your combined sewer that you then treat as if it was wastewater. There's a cost to that. That's how you start to convert the bean counter into a tree hugger, when you can show how much that costs, that you're just wasting it and putting it back into a pipe. But the reality is there's really public health, safety, life issues that have to be addressed with flooding. The 2 diagrams that you're looking at is a storm that happened in the last 12 months. That geyser, I would say, is about 30 feet in the air, and the top of it is a manhole. Because the pressure at the confluence of these major stormwater piping systems are so big, because upstream development have come down so impervious that it lifts a manhole 35 feet in the air and floods the neighborhood. Those are cars submerged. And you have a very large, amazing park that was engineered not to accept water. It's interesting. So how can we alleviate that conflict, that big circle where these pipes come together? The top of the watershed, the green, drains to the north through all the institutions, down around and into Hollow, into a pipe. Squirrel Hill and the areas in yellow and kind of tan drain to the south, and they come back to that confluence. So we need to reduce water before it hits that confluence. We need to keep it out of the pipe. So from a Google Earth, just a diagrammatic perspective, we need to harvest water up in Squirrel Hill. We need to harvest water from Schenley Drive. We need to connect some areas that have some flood opportunities and figure out how we reinforce that connection to the river. Well, that's exactly what we did. And the concept said, let's take Squirrel Hill off the grid, and let's turn their stormwater drainage before it gets into the pipe into the Hollow and into the park. And let's daylight that stream of 80 million gallons of fresh water and create a meandering stream and a concept that is in the engineering world called strategic sewer separation. We've now removed in excess of 22 to 25 million gallons of rainwater every time it rains, and we're proposing to create an interconnected natural systems park-like corridor where people can walk through here, bikes can walk through here, but more importantly, stormwater isn't forced back into that pipe to create those flooding events. That's one of the quick renderings of what that would look like. And that's a comparable cost to that of a gray tunnel solution that frankly won't solve any of the flooding issues, and you won't see it once it's buried 200 feet below this landscape. Imagine those green patches. Some could be wetlands and outdoor classrooms. You could have more soccer fields and put the storage of the stormwater underneath. They can look like this, and that's what I don't know if everyone knows what green infrastructure looks like, but you can use your roads as your stormwater collectors. You can put bump outs for traffic calming. There's a very large kit of parts for green infrastructure, whether it's in the park and terraces, or it looks as just very urban, like Squirrel Hill. That's going to be a very urban condition. We can only put pervious concrete or skinny bioswales. We can't put these big meandering streams in Squirrel Hill because it's built out. But we just need to apply a different kit of parts to that ecosystem. Shenley Drive, similarly, these are public realm amenities that will also revitalize and elevate the public realm community. The Junction Hollow can look natural and woolly and fuzzy. It could also be rigid in geometry and contemporary. The aesthetic, frankly, comes from the neighborhood and the community. That's a design process. These are what green infrastructure projects should be striving to achieve within this country, and especially in Pittsburgh. Washington Boulevard, Negley Run, same process, different outcome. Washington Boulevard, Negley Run, interestingly enough, has an asset of a VA campus, a youth detention center, and major green infrastructure opportunities that can be about workforce training and development. It also has a very sizable transit hub, which equates to asphalt, concrete, and runoff. You have a regional park with Highland Park just also connected to that. So how can, through urban design, we link those assets, create healthy walkable corridors to promote everything we're talking about, but give the infrastructure program so it has regenerative outcomes, so it doesn't just technically work, but it promotes economic development. It incorporates community engagement and revitalization, and it's a sustainable showcase that is much more resilient than just simply a concrete pipe. Now you start to look at what this graphic looks like. This diagram, we're looking at kit of parts where red or pink are pervious pavement systems. We're looking at large bodies of blue as large ponds and lakes. So restore Silver Lake around Westinghouse Academy. Pull that water and capture it before it goes down Washington Boulevard and causes flooding. Create flood control opportunities in the parkland adjacent to Washington Boulevard, but treat it as a whole system so it doesn't hit that pipe and do the same thing it does in Shenley Park and the bottom of the run. That system removes 45.97 million gallons every time it rains. 45 million gallons removed from that watershed every time it rains. Southside Park, same process, different outcome. Has an underfunded neighborhood park. And so I'm going to make a park pledge here. You need to figure out how to deal with your neighborhood parks, just in general. There's a lot of opportunities here. But for the bean counter, the biggest cost in this watershed is the silt and the sediment that they have to vacuum out of pipes every rainfall event, because this hillside and these parks in this area are old strip mines that erode every time it rains. So you need to solve that problem. Well, 21st Street had been a very much an interesting corridor of study for a long time around stormwater management. Carson Street is a mixed-use viable corridor, and 18th Street is what gets you to the pedestrian crossing to the river. This system right here, simplistically diagrammed, looking at Carson, we're not talking about reinventing Carson, but we can fit a bioswale down the middle of the street, and we can put pervious pavement where they park. That can be subsurface storage. That can be public realm improvements for a mixed-use area that may want a facelift. But more importantly, that then removes 37.981 million gallons from the watershed every time it rains. That system. So if we truly want to overcome blight and disinvestment, to create regenerative infrastructure solutions as a group, we need to create a holistic approach that looks at strategic, node-based, transit-oriented community development. Those little series of buzzwords or how you can get complementary funding from DC. That's how you can leverage other departments of funding mechanisms around one bigger vision. We need to lobby for change. You need to prioritize community-based planning, gets integrated into these as opposed to draped on top of and just given lip service around, because the community won't take ownership in something that they're not involved in. And then define innovative pathways towards this implementation, so you're leveraging housing dollars and transit dollars and infrastructure dollars to create these healthy, walkable communities that then get crime reduction opportunities and get health baseline opportunities to make this thing sustainable. And so I hope I didn't make it as gross as it could have been before lunch. And I wanted to thank everybody today for a couple reasons. One, to be in a room with adults is overwhelming right now. I've spent the last 4 days with 9 to 10 kids in Disney World, and I flew in this morning, and I almost went straight to the bar, but I said, no, I have to come here and speak. I have to be sober. I can't do that, I know. So it's, once again, just thank you very, very much. It's an honor to be here today, and if anybody has any questions, I can talk green infrastructure until I'm blue in the face. Thank you all very much.